Many Magic the Gathering players ask the question, how do I draft Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth? Magic the Gathering's foray into Middle-earth is massive, with 261 brand new cards in the main set covering the entire trilogy, including many different variations on all your favorite Lord of the Rings characters. There are myriad ways to play with these exciting new cards, from Commander to Modern to Kitchen Table Magic. But by far, the best way to fully immerse yourself into Magic the Gathering's Middle-earth is by playing Lord of the Rings Limited. Of course, diving into a brand new limited format can be intimidating even for enfranchised players, and for players new to the game. The barrier to entry can often feel insurmountable. But that's why this video will provide you with the tools you need to play Lord of the Rings Limited with confidence. It will cover the basics of the format, including the set's mechanics, what a deck from each color combination should look like, the mana fixing, and some key cards to be aware of when opening your packs. Now, for the purposes of simplicity, this video will focus on draft, but most of the information covered also applies to Lord of the Rings Sealed, which means it will also be useful if you plan to attend a Lord of the Rings pre-release at your local game store. Remember, pre-release events are something this channel has consistently said is worth it. Check out what times your local game store is holding pre-release and go on down to Shuffle Up and Play and experience this new set. Whether you're a new player who's picking up the game because you love Lord of the Rings, or you're a more experienced player who just wants to feel better prepared before attending your local draft night, this video has you covered. Please note, this video will assume you have a basic understanding of what draft is and how it works. But if you are brand new to Magic the Gathering or have never drafted before and don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, I've got a video going over the basics of draft right here. You can click above or look in this video's description for a link. I highly recommend checking out that video if you are new to limited formats such as draft. All right, let's begin with Part 1. Mechanics. First things first, let's talk about the mechanics from Tales of Middle-earth. There are two mechanics in the set that are brand new to Magic the Gathering. The first is, of course, the Ring Tempts You. The second is only new to Magic the Gathering because of the variation in creature type associated with the mechanic, Amass Orcs. There are also a slew of returning mechanics: food tokens, the legendary super type, and its umbrella category, historic spells, and type cycling. Let's talk about each of these one at a time. The Ring Tempts You. Magic's take on the alluring power of the One Ring comes in the form of the Ring Tempts You. This is a complicated mechanic at first glance, but fortunately, Wizards of the Coast has printed a reminder card telling you both what the ring does and how the Ring Tempts You mechanic works. The first time the Ring Tempts You, you create an emblem called the Ring. Emblems cannot be removed from play once they are created. Each time the Ring Tempts You, including the first, you must first choose a creature to become your ring bearer. If you've already assigned a ring bearer from a previous instance of the Ring Tempts You, you may choose to keep that creature as your ring bearer, or you may choose to assign a new creature as your ring bearer. Then the ring gains the next successive ability printed on the ring emblem. There are 4 abilities that the ring can gain. They are in order. Your ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. Whenever your ring bearer attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. Whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at end of combat. Whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. Once your ring has gained all 4 abilities, it doesn't gain any more regardless of how many more times the ring tempts you. However, each time the ring tempts you, you still choose a ring bearer. Got all that? No? Well, don't worry, you don't have to commit it to memory in order to play Lord of the Rings Limited. The reminder card will always be available to you regardless of whether you opened one in one of your packs. Just ask the event staff. What is important to know is that the ring tempting you is always a good thing in Tales of Middle-earth Limited, contrary to what you might think if you have even a basic understanding of the story. There are no downsides to the ring tempting you, so don't be afraid to slip that bad boy onto your finger and have a good time. Amass Orcs. The second new mechanic is a redo of a mechanic from notorious Magic expansion War of the Spark. Only this time it's not about zombies, it's about orcs. Whenever you amass Orcs X, put X +1/+1 counters on an army you control. It's also an orc. If you don't control an army, create a 0/0 black orc army creature token first. The first time you amass orcs, the mechanic essentially reads, create an XX token where X is the amount you amassed. Each time you amass, once you already have an orc army token in play, that token will simply grow. It won't make any additional armies until your original army is destroyed. Food tokens. Food is a mechanic first introduced in Throne of Eldraine. Food tokens are artifacts with the ability, pay 2 generic mana, tap, and sacrifice this food token to gain 3 life. Some foods, such as lembas, are not tokens and will have an additional ability beyond sacrificing for some life. There are also many cards that allow you to use or sacrifice food in order to gain other abilities. This is the primary function of food. Despite their life gain capabilities, you're generally better off using your food to enable the other cards in your deck rather than simply gaining life. That said, if your life total is in danger, you can always spend the 2 mana to cash in your food for a bit of life buffer. Legendary creatures. Legendary creatures are a part of every set these days, but in Tales of Middle-earth, Legendary Creatures matters as a mechanic on many cards. Certain cards require a legendary creature in play in order to reach their full potential. Fortunately, there are no shortages of legendary creatures in this set. Every color and color combination has them. There's also your Ring Bearer, which becomes legendary the moment it becomes your Ring Bearer, even if it's not legendary to begin with. Historic spells. Historic, a category first introduced in Dominaria, is back with Tales of Middle-earth. In understanding historic, remember, squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. I say this because all legendary spells are historic, but not all historic spells are legendary. Historic spells include the following card categories: cards with the legendary supertype, cards with the artifact card type, and enchantments with the saga subtype. Type cycling. Type cycling is a variation on the deciduous cycling mechanic, but instead of cycling to draw a card, these cards cycle to search up a specific card type printed on the card. In Tales of Middle-earth, there are 5 type cycling cards that each cycle for one of the 5 basic land types. I'll discuss these cards in a bit more detail later in the video, but these are very strong mana fixers that you should definitely keep an eye out for as packs go around the table. Part 2. Archetypes. Now let's talk about the different archetypes available to draft in Tales of Middle-earth. When building a deck in Limited, whether in draft or sealed, you'll most likely play 2 colors, as it's rare to have enough playable cards in a single color, and it's generally not a good idea to splash additional colors unless you have a good reason to do so. The set designers at Wizards of the Coast know this, and therefore designed each set to have specific themes associated with each of the 10 2-color combinations in Magic. To point you in the right direction, most sets have what's known as signpost uncommons, which are 2-color uncommons that play into their archetype's mechanic or central theme. In Tales of Middle-earth, each color pair has 2 uncommons, at least one of which is a legendary creature. Let's take a look at each of the 2-color archetypes and what those signpost uncommons are. The blue-black deck in Tales of Middle-earth Limited is a control deck centered around amassing orcs and a sub-theme of milling yourself for value. Removal, counterspells, and powerful finishers can all be found within this color combination. Control the board, accrue cards, and eventually win the game with a few hits from a massive orc army token. The uncommons in this color pair are the Mouth of Sauron and Ring Sight. Mouth of Sauron is 5 mana for 2 creatures. The Mouth itself, a 3/4, and the orc army it amasses, which depends on the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. Ring Sight is a 3 mana tutor spell that requires you to have a legendary creature in play. Unless you have both a great spell to tutor for, such as a bomb or a board wipe, you probably shouldn't put Ring Sight in your deck. If you do though, remember that the ring tempting you can turn one of your non-legendary creatures legendary. The black-red deck is an aggro deck with hordes of orcs and goblins. This is another deck that loves to amass orcs. creatures. It also has a sacrifice sub-theme, treating its creatures as expendable fodder for winning the war. The uncommons in this color pair are two legendary orc creatures, Mehar and Ugluk. Mehar is a 2-mana 2/2 with Menace that provides an additional +1/+1 counters whenever you grow an orc, goblin, or army you control. Ugluk is a 4-mana 3/3 that gets +1/+1 counters anytime a creature that you control dies, and gets an additional +1/+1 counter if that creature was an orc or a goblin. Remember, those creatures could die from your own sacrifice effects, or they can die in combat. Either way, you'll trigger Ugluk. The red-green archetype wants a lot of mana in order to cast huge creatures. It's a ramp deck with big, splashy threats at the top end, and some other cards that care about having creatures with 4 or greater power. The red-green uncommons are Friendly Rivalry and Strider, Ranger of the North. Friendly Rivalry is a bite-style removal spell that gets better if you have an additional legendary creature in play. Strider is a 4-mana 4/4 with Landfall, a recently deciduous mechanic that triggers whenever a land comes into play. Whenever you trigger Landfall with Strider in play, target creature gets +1/+1. Then, if the creature has 4 power or more, it gains first strike until end of turn. The green-white deck is an aggressive, mostly Hobbit deck with a food token sub-theme, because of course it is. Build a wide board of stout little hobbits and their friends, load up on food tokens, and overrun your enemies with the power of the Shire. The uncommon in this color combo are Frodo Baggins and Butterbur, Bree Innkeeper. Frodo is a 1/3 halfling scout for 2 mana. Whenever Frodo Baggins or another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, the ring tempts you. As long as Frodo is your ring bearer, it must be blocked if able. Butterbur is not a hobbit, but he does make food at the end of your turn if you don't already control a food. The blue-white archetype is a mid-range deck that rewards you from drawing your second card in a turn. The archetype naturally has a lot of card advantage and also comes with plenty of flying creatures to evade your opponent's blockers. The signpost uncommons are Gwaihir the Windlord and Prince Imrahil the Fair. Gwaihir is a 4/4 flying vigilant bird noble for 6 mana, but costs 2 less mana if you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn. Imrahil is a 2-mana 2/2 that creates a 1/1 human soldier whenever you draw your second card in a turn. Both of these cards are phenomenal, but Gwaihir is particularly excellent, as 4/4 flying vigilance creatures have been oppressive threats on the battlefield dating all the way back to the very beginning of Magic the Gathering. The blue-red deck is a spells deck. You want a density of instants and sorceries, as several of your cards get better the more spells you have. There are a lot of good blue and red spells in Tales of Middle-earth, including removal spells, counter magic, and card draw. Finding the right balance of creatures to spells can be tricky though, as you do need creatures in order to have a successful limited deck. I would recommend drafting between 10 and 12 good creatures in most blue-red decks. The signpost uncommons in this archetype are Gandalf's Sanction and Bilbo Retired Burglar. Gandalf's Sanction is a removal spell that scales based on the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. Any extra damage it deals to its targeted creature is dealt to the creature's controller instead. Bilbo is a 1/3 halfling rogue for 3 mana. When he enters or leaves the battlefield, the ring tempts you, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. The red-white deck is another go-wide aggro deck, this time with humans as a sub-theme. Token generation and wide buffs to your creature's power are common in this archetype. This deck hits hard and fast, and thus how strong the deck proves to be, and how good the slower decks are at surviving the initial onslaught with removal and blockers, will determine the overall gameplay of the Tales of Middle-earth format. Will this be a format defined by quick games and early aggression, or is there room for the slower decks to breathe and stabilize? The signpost uncommons are a pair of legendary creatures, Shadowfax, Lord of Horses, and Theoden, King of Rohan. Shadowfax, Gandalf's legendary steed, is a 5-mana 4/4 that grants all your horses, including Shadowfax himself, haste. Whenever he attacks, you may put a creature card with lesser power from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Theoden, King of Rohan, is a 2/3 human noble for 3 mana that grants creatures double strike whenever a human enters play, including Theoden himself. The white-black deck is another sacrifice-based strategy. This deck combines the token generation in white and the sacrifice outlets in black to create a grindy attrition deck that can win without making much use of the combat step. The uncommons in this archetype are Denethor, Ruling Steward, and Shadow Summoning. Denethor is a 2/4 sack outlet for 3 mana. Pay 2 mana and sacrifice a creature to drain your opponent for 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, make a 1/1 human soldier token. Yes, you can sacrifice that token on your next turn to Denethor and then get a new token on your end step. He's his own enabler. Shadow Summoning is a 2-mana sorcery that creates 2 tapped 1/1 flying creature tokens. Despite their entering tapped, this is an extremely powerful card that only gets better the more copies of it you draft. Flying is great in limited, as is spreading your board's total power and toughness across multiple creatures. The black-green deck also has some sacrifice sub-themes, though many of these sack outlets in this archetype can sacrifice food tokens as well. This is another grindy attrition deck, but with a bit more top-end thanks to the mana generation available in green. The signpost uncommons are Rise of the Witch King and Old Man Willow. Rise of the Witch King is a mutual sacrifice spell. If you sacrifice a creature this way, you may return another permanent to the battlefield from your graveyard. Old Man Willow is a 4-mana legendary tree folk with power and toughness equal to your land count. When Old Man Willow attacks, you may sacrifice another creature or a token to give a creature your opponent controls -2/-2. The last archetype in Tales of Middle-earth is the blue-green deck, an elf deck with a lot of bonuses from scrying. This deck wants a nice mix of creatures and spells that allow you to scry. Your creatures will grow larger and you'll filter through your deck for the right cards for whatever situation you find yourself in. The signpost uncommons are Arwen, Undamiel, and Legolas, Counter of Kills. Arwen is a 2/2 for 2 mana that puts +1/+1 counters on your creatures whenever you scry. Arwen also has a 6-mana activated ability that scries 2, a nice mana sink for late in the game. Legolas is a 4-mana 2/3 with reach. Whenever a creature your opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Legolas. Once per turn, if you scry while Legolas is tapped, you may untap him. This can set up an ambush if your opponent tries to attack into a tapped Legolas when you are holding up an instant speed scry effect. Part 3. Mana. Now let's talk about mana and mana fixing. Mana fixing is an important part of building a limited deck. In a typical 17-land deck with no additional mana fixing, you have only a total of 17 mana sources, which means if you are playing 2 colors, as you often will, you only have 17 ways to generate one of your 2 colors. Maybe that's 9 forests and 8 islands, or 10 swamps and 7 mountains, or any other combination of 2 different basic land types. The more pieces of mana fixing that you draft, the more consistently you'll be able to cast your spells, and the less likely that you'll lose a game due to your deck not functioning. With enough mana fixing, you can even splash a 3rd color, though you should only do this if you both A, have a powerful card worth splashing for, and B, have sufficient mana fixing to cast that card. Never splash for your mana fixing. Land cycling cards. The most reliable access to mana fixing that you'll find in Tales of Middle-earth are the basic land cyclers. This set has 1 such cycler for each basic land type. Eagles of the North for white, Lorien Revealed for blue, Troll of Khazad-dûm or something for black, Oliphant for red, Generous Ent for green. These are all great cards to play if your deck contains the color of the cycler, but don't play more than 1 to 2 copies of any given one of these. When counting your colored mana sources in your deck, these cyclers count for 1 such source of their associated color. Mana fixing artifacts. There are also a few artifacts that serve as mana rocks or otherwise fix your mana. These are Inherited Envelope, Shire Scarecrow, Phial of Galadriel, and Wizard Rockets. At 3 mana, Inherited Envelope is likely too slow for draft, though it is likely serviceable in sealed. Phial of Galadriel has a similar issue, but some decks with a low curve might be able to trigger the extra card ability reliably enough that the mana rock element of the card is just a bonus. Shire Scarecrow has a lot of potential in slower 3-color and up decks, since the Scarecrow can stem the bleeding in combat while it filters your mana up the curve. Wizard's Rockets can't fix your mana long term, but it is the perfect card if you're trying to splash a single bomb, and it gives you access to as many colors of mana as you'd like and replaces itself with a fresh card after it's done its job. That all said, none of these artifacts are strong enough to enable more than a very light splash and should not be prioritized very highly when drafting. Lands. There are 4 lands in Tales of Middle-earth that provide mana fixing. 2 of them, the Grey Havens and Great Hall of the Citadel, are great at splashing for legendary creatures. Grey Havens is a weird one, as it only taps for colored mana if there's a legendary creature card in your graveyard. That means it probably won't help fix mana early in the game, but could be a multicolor source as the game goes on. Scrying when it enters the battlefield is great though, so I wouldn't shy away from playing 1 copy of this card if you have several legends to enable it. Mount Doom is the only true dual land in the set, tapping for either red or black mana. It's a phenomenal card in red-black decks though, as it not only fixes mana but also has a built-in board wipe attached. Shire Terrace is the most reliable land for mana fixing, as it can go in any deck. Don't expect these lands to come back around, especially if you're in pick 5 through 7 of a pack. They are likely to be highly valued. Treasure tokens. Treasure tokens shouldn't be relied on as a source of fixing. If you have a lot of treasure producers, they can contribute to splashing a bomb or 2, but you should pick up a land cycler in your splash color as well. You don't want to end up in a spot where you feel like you have to save your treasure token in case you draw your bomb. Green fixing. A staple of Limited is green-based fixing. This set has plenty, from cards that search up basic lands of any type to creatures that tap for any color of mana. If you're a green-based deck, you can likely afford to splash for additional colors if you open an off-color bomb, but you shouldn't play green just to have access to mana fixing. I've said this before and I'll say it again, never splash for mana fixing. It defeats the purpose of mana fixing. And there you have it. Those are the basics of Tales of Middle-earth Limited. If this format is exciting to you, I highly recommend going deeper. Seek out a written Limited set review online, or check out one of the many awesome Limited Magic the Gathering podcasts or YouTube channels that are available. I'll link several in this video's description. Limited is an exciting, rewarding format with a near infinite permutation of decks and matchups. It's a great way to fully immerse yourself in a new set, and is therefore the perfect way to experience Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Today, we have a powerful pod of potent personalities coming to bring you Commander, but with a twist.
This format is Treasure Cruise. It was developed by members of my Discord to satisfy the base Magic player urge to gamble whenever possible. It features a special add-on deck of mostly helpful artifacts with a couple harmful curses that you can roll a die to go digging and get something for free on your board.
Ba-boom! God damn it!
Is this back-to-back curses? Oh, it's time. It's time for bees.
No,
not the bees.
Ironcrag Pyromancer. I see a lot of things that die to 3 damage, so I'm pretty excited about that.
So everything in your hand and in play dies to removal?
Specifically removal that is set up by the Howling one that's currently in play. I'll stop it. Outside of game, how, if I'm gonna just top.
I think you need to say to the camera, I'd like some top, please.
I would like some top, please.
It's almost